Well, I'm glad all of you were able to come out on a Friday morning. I'm looking forward to sharing stories with you. Again, this time is your time, so as I'm going through, if at any point you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm in the driver's seat, so I know where we have to go, and I know what time we have to get there. So if we take a little detour to see the largest ball of string in the world, that's okay. I can still get us where we need to get done. And since this is Pixelmania, we're going to talk first off a little preface about photography and theme park photography, and then we're going to take a little walk through the Wilderness Lodge. Hopefully you'll be able to see it from a little different perspective than you normally do. And I kept forgetting that this is Pixelmania, so I should have brought my suit and all of this, so all these pictures that are out there.
Really?
And again, when these get posted on blogs and websites, if I don't end up looking like George Clooney, there's something wrong with your digital camera. Take that back and get that taken care of. For those of you who are not familiar with me, my name is Jim Korkis. I'm a Disney historian. I write an awful lot of articles about Disney history. I've written a book called The Vault of Walt, which is available on Amazon.com. I go and I do a lot of speeches to a lot of different groups. In fact, this summer in July, I went to the Disney Family Museum in San Francisco. I was invited there as a guest speaker, and I talked about Walt Disney's fascination with outer space. And I was able to have lunch with, at her invitation, with Diane Disney Miller, so I got to talk a lot. I knew that I was coming to Pixelmania, so I asked her a lot about her father's interest in photography. And she said that ever since Walt was a young child, he loved cameras. You know, even as a young child, they didn't have any money. They made a little, he made a little pinhole camera. All of this, I met his granddaughter, Tammy, and Tammy said, the one thing I remember about Grandpa is he always had a camera with him. Always. And she said, one of the other things I remember is he was always encouraging every member of the family to go take pictures. And in fact, at the Disney Family Museum, most of the stills on the wall and a lot of the film footage is directly from Walt himself. In fact, there's a very funny photo where Walt is down on his knee and scrunched over to the side, whatever, and what had happened is he had given the camera to his grandson, Christopher, and it was one of those ones where you look through the top to try and get that. So he was having difficulty getting all of Grandpa into that. So Grandpa got down on the ground. So Christopher, who was very short, could get that picture taken. There's lots of home movie footage, but again, you think, oh my gosh, you know, you've got well over 18 hours of footage that Walt Disney took. But some of it is he went to the beach and he would shoot a crab that would be walking sideways because the movement just fascinated him. And again, that's something that you need to keep in mind is, you know, when you're going around, if something fascinates you, take a picture of it. You know, because what you are is you are really the eyes of a future generation. That's simply what it is. And you have an advantage that other generations never had. And that is that you can take as many pictures as you want, and it's not going to cost you much of anything at all. In the old days, with cameras, you had to buy the camera, you had to buy the film, you had to develop and print the film. Cameras were limited to how many shots they could take, so you had to plan, what shot am I going to take? You know, and you didn't even know whether you had gotten the shot or not, whether it was blurry or, you know, you had moved or whatever, or you thought you had taken something and you cut off somebody's head. You don't have any of those things to worry about. Take as many things as you want. There are a lot of websites out there now. Gorillas Don't Blog, Stuff from the Park, Daveland, which have all of these great photos from Disneyland in 1955. You know, imagine what you would take now if you had the camera that you had now and went out there to take those pictures. What pictures would you take? And again, what's amazing to me is sometimes the things you want to see are the things that people didn't pay attention to. For instance, at Disneyland, when Disneyland opened in 1955, one of the things they had in Fantasyland was the Welch's grape juice bar, okay? And so they sold grape juice and they sold those grape juice fruit bars for you to get. Why did you want to take pictures of that? Because the back mural of that was done by Ivan Earle, the layout artist who did Sleeping Beauty and so many other great things for Disney. I know of only one picture that exists of that, and that's in black and white, and it doesn't even cover the entire mural. Was there even a photo of what was being sold at the Welch's juice bar, and what those items were called, and how much they cost? And it's not there. But there are 50 million pictures of people standing in front of the castle. There's 50 million pictures of people standing in front of the Mickey at the front of the park. In fact, the Mickey at the front of the park is the most photographed location at a Disney theme park. The second is in front of the castle. All right? So, as you go out there, you need to think that you're documenting for future generations things that disappear. I always like to say that Disney's middle name is Jello, because things are constantly changing. Something could be set in stone, and 5 minutes later, it's completely different. Some of you got here early, and you saw me running around the lodge, and I tried to be friendly with people who came up, but I was running around the lodge because I wanted to make sure things are still here, that they didn't disappear. And there are some things that have disappeared. One of the things that have disappeared is that since the lodge opened in 1994, right across from the entranceway, there were 2 bison topiary. And I know the bison topiary are meant to be there, because if you go out and you take a look at the sidewalk, you will see the bison hoof prints in the ground leading right to the location where they're supposed to be. They're not there now. I have no idea why they're not there now. Are they being refurbished? Will they ever come back? I don't know. Well, fortunately, you must have taken tons of pictures of those, right? You didn't just say, oh, well, those will always be there. So as we go through that today, take a look. Now, one of the great debates that often comes up for photographers is, now, should you take this clean? You know, with no people in it, so, you know, you want to get that, oh, I love that picture of the castle when there's nobody there, you know? I love this where, you know, and I just get this. A lot of the pictures we love from the 1950s and the 1960s have people in them, because we love to see the way they're dressed. We love to see pictures from 1958 and people going to Disneyland, and men are in suit and ties, and women are wearing gloves and pearls and look like Donna Reed, you know? Because it tells you something about that time period. When you're watching documentaries, I just finished watching the 3-part Ken Burns documentary on Prohibition. Yes, I love those, the newsreel clips of, yes, here's Al Capone being, captured and taken to court. But what I also love was the footage that they found of people just playing in their own backyard. Oh my gosh, that's what people did. That's what people did for a living. That's what the cars looked like at that time. That's what the street looked like, whatever. So as you go through and you take photos, keep in mind, yes, it's good to get a nice clean shot, but sometimes it's good to have people involved. Because remember, the designers, the Imagineers of the Disney theme parks, especially Disneyland, were motion picture art directors. So some of those great Imagineers that we think of, like Richard Irvine and Marvin Davis, even Ken Anderson, they had their career starting at 20th Century Fox as motion picture film directors. So they're creating not just a building that would be a turn-of-the-century building, but what is that turn-of-the-century building going to look like when it is photographed? You know, Cypress Gardens, obviously not a lot of you went there because it went out of business, right? Now it's Legoland. But Cypress Gardens was created by Dick Pope. And when Dick Pope was building Cypress Gardens, he was an amateur photographer, so the first thing he did was he set up a tripod with a camera on it. Why? Oh, he wanted to do one of those time-lapse photography things of, you know, building up. No. He set the camera there so he could take a look and see, where do I put the pathways, where do I put the growth, whatever, and if it wasn't going to be a good shot, he changed where the pathway was. He changed where the garden was going to be planted. He changed where the color of the flowers were. So that when people went to Cypress Gardens, 99% of the time, they could get a great photo. Now, when Disney does things right, they really do it right. And so the Imagineers have done the same thing. They have created compositions for you that are pretty much foolproof. You know, for instance, the castle at the park, you can take that from just about any angle and it still hits that emotional reaction. And it still looks like the castle. And it still looks wonderful. That's not true of every single building. Now let's talk a little bit about Wilderness Lodge here. Wilderness Lodge is one of my favorite resorts, and I think a lot of times, and I recommended this to Tim, because I think a lot of times people concentrate so much on the parks that they forget the wonderful Disney resorts and the storytelling, the attention to detail that goes in, what is happening there. And so this is a wonderful opportunity, and Wilderness Lodge is certainly a wonderful example of that, because there are two different stories to the Wilderness Lodge. There's the story that most of us see, which is the story that is being told by the architecture. And we're going to walk around the park, and I'm going to walk around the resort, and I'm going to point some of those things out. But the Imagineers came up with an entire backstory as well for the Wilderness Lodge. And do you realize that the Wilderness Lodge is the very first Disney resort that has an official mascot? It's the brown bear. It's not just Humphrey the bear. Humphrey the bear is the kid version to make it kid-friendly for kids, because brown bears can be ferocious and terrifying and wild. They're not like Yogi Bear. You know, they can be dangerous, but to make it accessible for kids, they also have included Humphrey the bear, which was a Disney cartoon character, but this is the very first Disney resort to have an official mascot. And that bear is throughout the resort. You see it on signs, you see it on scratchings in the walkway, the bear claws there, you see shadows. There's actually an image up here, which I'll point out later, where you can actually see the bear face. These are the bear paws, by the way, that are coming out along the side, and I'll explain to you how that happened as well. But let's go back to the beginning. Groundbreaking here took place in 1992. The resort itself opened May 1994, and the Wilderness Lodge was designed by Peter Dominic Jr. Now, Peter Dominic Jr., outstanding architect. He's also responsible for Disney Animal Kingdom Lodge, and if you take a look at Animal Kingdom Lodge, you'll see some similarities. Also responsible for the Grand Californian out in California. All right. One of the reasons Peter Dominic Jr. was chosen was because he was an avid outdoorsman. He was a fly fisherman. He understood the outdoors so that he could combine that. The other reason Peter Dominic Jr. was chosen, he was a photographer. So he specifically set up areas which were going to be great for photographers to take. Wonderful. So much in there that you could spend a month here and still not be able to see everything that he's incorporated in there for that story. Now, Peter Dominic Jr.'s inspiration was Stephen Mather. Stephen Mather was the first director of the national parks, and Stephen Mather felt that if you were going to build a structure at the national park, you need to use indigenous material that's from that area. So you don't build a concrete and steel building, because that doesn't blend in with the wilderness. It doesn't blend in with the desert. It doesn't blend in with the rocks. Whatever, you use the material that is there. And so the early architects like Robert Reamer, who Stephen Mather hired, went with that. And so Peter Dominic Jr. went and studied those. He went to Yosemite. He went to Yellowstone. He went to Glacier National Park to get ideas. And in fact, if you take a look at this lodge carefully, you'll see there are an awful lot of elements that were obviously inspired by Old Faithful Inn in Yellowstone, especially the lobby, and the exterior, the LODGE-1.AVI Lodge at Yosemite. And in fact, one of the things that I used to do when I taught Disney by Design, which was an architecture class, is I would have a slideshow, and I would show pictures from Old Faithful Inn, I'd show pictures from the LODGE-1.AVI Lodge, and have people try and guess, is it from there or is it from here? And I'd mix it up with photos from here, and 9 times out of 10, people just couldn't, you know, well, is that there? I don't know, as that goes through. Now, when this was built, this was the time of the Pleasure Island, right? Michael Eisner had come on board. Imagineering had told him about storytelling. Michael Eisner became enamored with storytelling. Everything that Disney built was going to have a story. So a story was created for the Wilderness Lodge. Basically, it's Colonel Ezekiel Moreland. And Colonel Ezekiel Moreland was a commander in the War of 1812, decorated commander. Shortly after the war, his wife passed away. So in 1823, he decided, inspired by the expeditions of Lewis and Clark, to put together an expedition of 50 men, old soldiers, map makers, naturalists, whatever, and they were going to leave St. Louis and explore the wilderness. Well, they had only been gone a few days when they ran into a buffalo stampede of 10,000 buffalo. And they had to literally climb trees to get out of the way. The buffalo stampede ruined their camp, ruined their provisions. You know, the men were disheartened. They wanted to go back. Moreland wanted to go on. They didn't want to go. So he wrote a note for them to take back to his only daughter that said, I'm going out into the wilderness on my own. So he did. He went out into the wilderness on his own. For 2 years, nobody heard from him. One of the things he discovered was he discovered this beautiful valley. And he discovered it, thank heavens, in the winter, because there was a hot spring. So he didn't have to suffer through the cold. And as a result, he found that Native Americans also had been using this area during the winter, and so he bonded with them. He traded for furs. His very first cabin that he built is still here today. It's the bike rental. Did you ever think, well, my gosh, this is a lodge. What is a little log cabin doing at, oh, well, they got to rent bikes. That's what. No, it's there because that is Colonel Moreland's very first cabin. And so it remained there as a tribute to him of finding this in the wilderness. So he was gone for 2 years, and I'm sure you've taken tons of pictures of that building, right? As opposed to just walking by and saying this has no meaning whatsoever, right? What happens after 2 years, he had got beaver pelts, he had traded for pelts. So when he came out of the wilderness, he was a moderately wealthy man with all of these furs that he had gotten. So he decided that with his daughter, who was an art curator at a museum, and that's very important because that will reflect the art that we see in here, an art curator at a museum, that they were going to go out and they were going to build a location for people to come out here and see this beautiful wilderness. And so his daughter, Jenny, had a boyfriend, Gustav, who was an artist, and so he came along. And in fact, the very first time they were out here in the wilderness, Gustav saw this wonderful outcropping, and he set up his easel, and you know, he was going to take a look at all of this and paint, and there was a rumbling, and he almost fell off, the point of the rock and all of that. And he says, oh, no, I've got it controlled, and the colonel knew what was going to happen. The geyser went off. And so poor Gustav fell over and the whole bit, but it was the perfect place to paint from. So it became known as Artist Point. And in fact, that's why the restaurant there now has that huge, huge panorama where you can take a look out because this is where artists came to paint. That's why that's the restaurant where you have all of those paintings on the wall. So the painters came and used that as the location to paint. And speaking of painters, you know that we're in a chronological story here. Fort Wilderness is where the first settlers came. That's why you have a campground. That's why you have those little cabins, because that's where the settlers came. Then, as you move towards here, you have the villas, which were built by the railroad workers. And you know, obviously it's the railroad workers, because the first time you go into the villas, what do you see? You see a roundhouse. That's what the lobby is. It's a roundhouse because it was built by railroad workers. That's why you have the Carrollwood Pacific room over there, which used to be the Iron Spike room. The railroad workers. And then you have the lodge, which was built for the artists and the photographers and the novelists and the rich tourists who wanted to come out but still wanted to have some elements of civilization. So that is where the main lodge came from, and then as it became popular, it expanded out on either side. And when you're out on Bay Lake and taking a look in, I'm going to take you into the bear's face, because some people go, everybody says there's a bear. I can't see it. I'll show you exactly where the bear's face is, but these are the paws that are stretching out at night, looking out towards there, because again, this is the resort that is based on the brown bear. Now, I'm sure you've also taken a lot of pictures of trout paths out there, right? That's another cabin. There's got to be a story behind that, right? There is. After Moreland passed away, his daughter decided to stay out here, run the lodge, but she needed a cook. And so Georgie McGregor showed up, and my golly, he said, I can cook and all that, you need a cook. But he was a terrible cook. And he said, you know, I'm going to build a cabin right next to the spring because that's going to be easier for me to catch the fish, the trout. And the guests were complaining because the trout were undercooked and they had holes in them. Well, Georgie McGregor had come out because he was a prospector. He figured Silver Springs, there's got to be silver and gold in this river. And so I'm going to set up an area over here away from the lodge so I can do panning for gold and all of this. He's not a fisherman, so he pulls out his gun and he's shooting the trout. That's why they have holes in them. Jenny finally found out because he was frustrated he wasn't getting anything because, again, there's no silver or gold. It's minerals. It's a hot spring, so it's recuperative for people to come out and visit. You know that people go to health springs and health spas. That's what it is. That's why the spring starts inside the lodge and comes out here. Well, basically what happened is he came out, brought some dynamite. He was going to toss in a stick of dynamite. He made a mistake. The stick went into the whole thing, blew a huge crater, which created this pool out here, which did not exist until that time. And Georgie, of course, ended up high on the tree that's right over here. And I don't know if any of you have been to that tree and have felt the leaves on that tree. It's something that the pioneers used. So right around the corner here, you go up and you feel the leaves, you'll feel something. Probably has something to do with the nickname of the tree, sandpaper tree. Not indigenous to Florida, but indigenous to the Pacific Northwest. So that pioneers could do that. In fact, a lot of the landscaping we see here is not indigenous to Florida. And in fact, as we move over towards the creek, if you listen carefully, and we'll be able to hear it when we go up onto the 4th floor and look out, so I'll probably point out what you are hearing, which makes this an immersive environment here. I know. And some of you will remind me in case I forget once we get up there for that. So there's this whole storyline here. Oh my gosh, you know, who would ever know this storyline? When the resort opened in 1994, they had a giveaway. You know that when you check into a Disney resort, they give you that little thing of where is the ice? What is the bus schedule? What is the laundry schedule? What is this? Well, what they did here at the Wilderness Lodge to blend all that together is they came up with a fake newspaper, the Silver Creek Star, and so they mixed in these stories with that information so that guests who came here could go along with that. That newspaper has not existed for over a decade. Remember, this opened in 1994, so it's only, what, 15, 16 years old? 10 years ago, all of that information is lost. I will tell you right now, the Disney Archives does not have a copy of that newspaper. I will tell you right now, this resort does not have a copy. They have a big binder of facts, so if you want to ask some facts about the Wilderness Lodge, they'll flip through, and 9 times out of 10 they can probably find, because most things are frequently asked, so that they can do that. They have no copy of that, of the whole story of Ezekiel Moreland. And again, if you don't share the story, if you don't keep the story alive, stories disappear. Stories go. All right? They disappear. There was a storyline for Port Orleans. There was a storyline for Dixie Landings. There was a storyline for the Caribbean beach. In fact, I've seen the newspapers for both Port Orleans and for Dixie Landings. They're different, and they explain why you have Old Man's Island out there and all of those other things. It's wonderful. I have not seen the one for Caribbean Beach. It's called Trade Winds. I'm still looking for a copy of that, but a whole story about why these things are there. Okay. Now, not knowing these things, does this make any difference to you? Not really. Okay? You know, it's like the story of Meriwether Adam Pleasure at Pleasure Island. That went on for literally a dozen pages or more. Single space type, no wonder. And so it became too heavy, because what happens is now when you change a store out, well, that store is part of the story, so you're losing that part of the story, and this other store is coming in. How can you create a story to... It's like what they did at Disney MGM. They bring in Rock and Roller Coaster, and now they go, oh, well, it used to be a radio station in the 40s, see? That's what it was, and then it became a record studio in the 50s, and then it... No, it's a roller coaster. You need to put a roller coaster over there for people. Okay, I got it. All right, it ruins the theming for everything else, but I got it. All right? Now, what we're going to explore right now is we're going to explore the architecture that we can still see and the story that is being told in there. Now, we want to be careful, again, not to, you know, fly high above Disney's radar here or impact, you know, guests who are coming and checking in and all of that. And so we'll just roll with the punches as that goes through. And we'll go up this hallway right here. And when we went through this hallway, I know you guys immediately saw what the theme was, see? Because storytelling and theming are completely different. A story is a story. Theming is immersive, where everything that you see, everything that you hear, everything that you touch, everything that you smell brings into that story. And as we came down that hallway, you immediately saw that story, right? Okay, let's help you out. Let's help you out here a bit. I'm going to be doing this all day. I'm going to be doing this all day. Have you seen this? Have you seen that? And I'm going to rub your noses in. I'm not even asking you to raise your hand. Have you ever been to the Wilderness Lodge before? So I can go, oh, you've been to the Wilderness Lodge before. You must know this, right? No, obviously you don't, okay? Hallway. You notice that the hallway is different than any other area in the lodge. For one thing, it's painted red. It can't be that they've run out of brown paint or burnt sienna. It's painted red. There's got to be a reason. Red, red. Where else have I seen that on Disney property? Oh, I went to the Epcot Food and Beverage Festival. You know, I went around the World Showcase. Oh, tell us, Jim, we've laughed at most of the junk. I went to China. China is red. Red indicates good fortune. China, Jim, this is the Pacific Northwest. What would Chinese be doing in the Pacific Northwest?
Building railroads.
Building railroads. Oh, how do I know that? Did you take a look at the carpet as we went up? It wasn't a straight carpet. It started to divide, so you have railroad tracks. Did you notice the sun coming in, so those rails I was going to have you stand up next to it at certain times of the day? The sun comes in, and so it hits that, and so it goes across, and there's train tracks. Did you notice the light? You didn't notice any of these things? And the lights that are up there that look like Chinese lanterns? Oh, we're going to get another chance to see them because we're going to go in. Come on.
Jim, one second.
Put your seats back.
Guys, just like Jim said, please try to stay as transparent as possible.